I hope it's not a static thing. I think what concerns me most is when people speak like they have a corner on the market, like they have all the answers. It's all sewn up. I worry for those people. It's not my place to sort out their issues, but that concerns me because that tells me they have stopped thinking. They have stopped asking. They have stopped questioning and mulling and trying out new things. Their mind is closed. And as that great expression, I think from the 60s said, your mind is like an umbrella. It only works when it's open.
Welcome to the Wealth and Wellness All Women Rock podcast, hosted by me, Tamara, the CEO and founder of All Women Rock Global. Join me on this journey as we explore topics, conversations, and interviews related to wealth and wellness. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Wealth and Wellness podcast by All Women Rock. I do want to start off by saying if I sound a little nasally, I have a sinus infection that does not seem to want to go away, but the show must go on. On today's episode, we are talking all things wellness. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Méli Solomon, and we talked about living our beliefs. I originally met Méli from a community we are both part of. I truly love her podcast and her research project in talking with different people about their religions. If you know me, and the reason I started All Women Rock Global is because I absolutely love diversity. I love meeting new people who don't look like me, who don't talk like me, and even those who share a totally different cultural experience than me. When I saw Méli talking to different people from various religions such as Christianity, Muslims, and Jews, I was so intrigued. Let me read you a little bit from her website. It says, reflect on your practice and expand your openness. My belief is that learning about the range of practices and values will both inspire greater self-reflection as well as expand openness to people walking other religious paths. Religious hate and discrimination, such as anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, have long damaged our communities. This time of division calls for change. I could not agree anymore. I was so intrigued and wanted to learn so much more about her project and her podcast after reading her website. I love it in so many ways. So before some of you try to judge and say, I don't think this podcast episode is for me. Religion is not my thing. I would love for you to be open and listen. We're going to expand our openness. Méli Solomon is a public scholar and founder of the Talking with God Project and the associated Living Our Beliefs podcast. The project and podcast explore the lived religion of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, so as to better understand how the observant live their lives and practices. She is actively expanding its reach through talks, workshops, guest appearances, and blog posts. Méli has an educational and professional background in business, fine art, language, training, and editing. In addition to an MBA from Northeastern University, she has a Master of Jewish Liberal Studies from Hebrew College. Méli grew up in the Boston area and returned in 2017 after 20 years living in Seattle, Washington, and Berlin, Germany. Let's take a listen to the episode. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the Wealth and Wellness podcast by All Women Rock. I am so excited for our interview on today. I have Ms. Méli Solomon with me. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. It's an honor to be here.
Yes, I did a lot of research, and I really want to share with you guys about the Talking with God project that she has. As you know, this is the Wealth and Wellness podcast. So our idea is to share wealth of knowledge, whether it's related to starting a business or launching a business, And wellness looks so much different for all of us, whether we believe in faith, believe in a higher power, whatever it may be that helps us get through days, helps us get through hard times. My goal is to share a wide range of things and allow you to be able to see things from a different light and experience life for something different and possibly learn something more that you maybe had to close eye behind, or maybe you felt like that wasn't for me. So the goal with the Wealth and Wellness podcast is to share a wide range of opportunities and different people from different walks of life so you can learn something new. So on today, we will be talking about all things wellness. I've been trying to think of like what area I want to start with. As I told you before, I've done a lot of research. I was so intrigued with our first conversation that we had. And then as I was constantly reading your website, your publications about the project that you have, it was so interesting for me because I always enjoy learning something new from somebody that doesn't look like me, that doesn't talk like me, that doesn't worship a God like me, whatever it may be. I just am interested to see other people's point of view. So would you start off by sharing more with us about the Talking with God project?
I'd be happy to, Tamara. So a little background. I began the Talking with God project when I was living in Berlin, Germany in 2014. I'm an observant Jew and had been attending a conservative synagogue for about 7 years at that point. And I found that I was sitting in synagogue every Saturday morning and reading prayers that really made me wonder about whether that portrayal of God and our relationship to God was actually how I see it and how I experience it. And I was going around and around in my head, as many of us often do when we're just stuck on something and not getting to an answer. And at some point I decided, hey, I'm living in Europe. I'm loving the intercultural experience, and this is just a fantastic excuse to talk to people I don't know. And so it was born. Since then, I have interviewed about 60 observant Jews, Christians, and Muslims of all kinds of walks of life, 20 years to 80 plus, mostly in America and Germany, but also other countries. And it's just been fascinating. It's really been such an eye-opener. I've learned so much, and I've helped people to think more deeply about their path, which is just a blessing.
I love that. So what would you say like the goal of the project was for the Talking with God project?
Yeah, good question. It's heavily educational. I am in no way trying to tell people how to live their life. You know, I never say, oh, here are 5 easy steps to a deeper relationship with God. That's not my métier. It's really a way to learn something, to reflect on your own ways and practice, and by understanding something about a different way of life, to then be more open and accepting of other people you encounter in the community. I see so much hate, discrimination, antagonism, and fear in our society and around the world that I see it, my project and the podcast, Living Our Beliefs podcast, as my efforts to support a more open and accepting way to engage with the world.
What would you say during your time with talking with these different people, do you think the participants possibly learned something new about themselves during that time?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. Not everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, in an interview with a Christian woman, lives in New Hampshire, small town New Hampshire. She's been a Christian all her life. She's shifted denomination slightly for reasons that are irrelevant to this conversation. And in the conversation, I realized that unlike with many other Christians, I hadn't heard her talk about Jesus at all. She spoke of God, she spoke of the church, she spoke of other things. And so at one point I asked her, do you take Jesus as your personal savior? That is one of the core elements of being a Christian, and it's certainly a big difference between Christians and Jews. And there was this protracted silence. And then she said something like, actually, no. And I was surprised by that. I said, so how does that feel to hear yourself say that? And she said, I'm kind of shocked. I think this has been a feeling in me for a long time, but I have never verbalized it.
Wow.
Yeah, that was absolutely a wow moment. It's not the only one, but it's a time that really stands out in my mind.
Wow. That's so interesting because as Christians, that is like the beginning of the foundation. Even when you get baptized, you're asked, do you believe Jesus died on the cross for your sins? Do you accept him as Lord of your, Jesus as, Lord and Savior of your life? So that's interesting. That kind of makes me think about how I had the question I kind of had. We spoke about this previously, how my experience of growing up, I grew up in the South. I grew up Baptist. All my life, I've always been Baptist. And as I got older and had children, I was always exposed to a diverse culture from living in Memphis, Tennessee. And then in the summers, I had to go live in California with my dad. And as you know, California is very diverse. He was always around a wide, diverse amount of people. So I wanted that same environment for my children. So that is why I chose to put them, not only for diverse reasons, but educational reasons. I wanted them in diverse circumstances. So as they grew older, they knew how to react and socialize with different people. So I originally put them in a predominantly white private school. My oldest went there for almost up into high school. And my youngest only went there a few years. And when I would try to get her to, anytime I was trying to go to church, I would always try to get her to socialize with the people at church. And we have vacation Bible school, we have Sunday school, all of that. And she couldn't interact with anyone. It just always felt awkward. And I noticed one day they had like choir practice, and I could see the look on her face, like, Mom, I'm trying, but this isn't working for me. And a couple of times we had went to a non-denominational church near our home, and she absolutely loved it. And I was like, are you acting like this because this is where you want to be? And she was like, no. So we gave it a few more tries, and I could just sense, I'm like, Taylor is not adjusting well to the Baptist environment, the predominantly Black church. So I decided to be more open. And I was like, well, I want to attend the church as well. So we went, absolutely loved it. We went a few more times. I absolutely loved it. But it was hard for me because I always grew up Baptist, to leave that alone and be like, I don't want any Baptist or evangelical Lutheran. I don't want any of that attached. I just want to say I'm non-denominational. That was hard for me, but I made the decision to do it. So it just kind of made me think about, even when I talk with my aunts and my uncles that are still Baptist, and I hear certain things they say, and I was like, man, it's so different talking with someone that's Baptist and one that isn't. For instance, like non-denominational was more inspirational to me. That's just my thought process. So I guess I'm kind of all over the place. So my question is, do you think that your environments play a big part in our religious decisions?
Do I think the environment plays a big part in our religious decisions?
Yes. Do you think that sometimes that we're kind of, like, for instance, for me being Baptist, growing up in the South, a whole lot of us are, not even just in Tennessee, are Baptist. Do you think that you just kind of put in that situation and you think that that's kind of how it goes? Do you think that your environment, the people that you're around, plays a huge part in you deciding what religion or non-religion that you
choose to do in life? Do you think that plays a huge part in it?
Oh, now I understand. That's a really interesting question. And I'm pausing because I don't have a pat answer.
Yeah.
I think it does have an influence, but I'm not at all sure it's so direct.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I was raised in an interfaith, non-observant family in the Northeast. My mother was Protestant, my father was Jewish, and we were raised with nothing. We would go to church with my mother's parents when we visited them in Pennsylvania. They were absolutely church-going Methodists, and that was just, part of visiting. But when I got into college, kind of partway through college, I realized that having two religions and no religion was not a good mix for me. And that began a journey that basically I'm still on, of sorting out who am I and what do I believe and how do I observe. Interestingly, among the people I've interviewed for the research, almost half have converted.
Really?
I've interviewed almost 60 people. Now, when I say converted, I'm taking that fairly broadly. So if somebody goes from Catholicism to evangelical, I count that as a convert. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know that they would, but for me, that's also a change. It's not as big as if you go from Christianity to Islam, but it's still a change, and something has prompted you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard all kinds of reasons for why people have changed and what has influenced that change. And sometimes it's childhood. Sometimes it's the larger environment. Sometimes it's simply, I didn't connect with Jesus as my savior, so I became a Jew or I became a Muslim. Interestingly, when I was living in Berlin, I was there for 8.5 years. I was active in the synagogue. I'd say a third to a half of our congregation were converts. I'm talking about Germans, right? Raised nominally Protestant. I also met a number of German folks who converted to Islam. And I found this really fascinating. And the reasons were all over the place.
So it wasn't just one reason. Yeah.
No. I mean, so one guy converted because, unsurprisingly, as a German, his father was a Nazi. And it was kind of a penance. That's striking. That's really striking. For other people, it's simply they didn't feel at home in the religion of their birth. And they felt moved as soon as they stepped into a synagogue and participated in a service. I heard that a bunch of times too. But yeah, I think drawing these connections between your background, your upbringing, and decisions you make religiously, it's a really interesting question. I'm definitely going to think about it more. But at the moment, I'd say I don't see a straight line.
Mm-hmm. Same here. It's just I'm always thinking about certain things. I've even had people question me about some of my decisions because my therapist that I have is a monk. And I'm like, it's not for you to figure out. It helps me in so many ways. Absolutely. He has helped me so much mentally. And I know there are certain times and certain people that kind of feel like the only way to receive help, Christians, I'll say, is through God. And I don't see it that way. I see it as being able to speak to someone and get help. I feel like God put those people in our lives for a reason. They have those professions and their expertise for a reason. So, yeah, some people feel like I'm kind of all over the place, but that's okay. I tend to do, what works best for me. But yeah, I've just always thought that, is that kind of the reason why so many of us, make decisions. And I have known people that have gone out outside of their normal environment and met other people. For instance, one young lady I met, she grew up Baptist household. Her dad was a pastor. She left home and went to school in Australia, came back an atheist. And I was like, man, how that I cannot even imagine the conversations she had to have with her parents when she got back home, but she shared that with me. And I was like, wow. So that's what the idea kind of came from as people branch off to different areas. Does that kind of your awareness is kind of heightened, like, is that really true? Do I really feel that way? Or was I just kind of made to believe that or made to feel that way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I know some people who have had such a radical change where a parent is deeply involved in the church. The two examples I'm thinking of, their parents were deeply academics or ministers, and they converted to Judaism in this case. And yes, that conversation at the dinner table must have been quite a conversation.
Yeah, he is a very, I will say, a very well-known pastor with a huge congregation. So yeah, to have your daughter come back and say, I'm an atheist.
Yeah. But that really, Tamara, that raises the important question for me about our relationship with God. And this idea that we are each made in God's image, right? That holds in all three of the Abrahamic faiths, in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We all believe that. And if that is indeed true, then shifting your identity, shifting how you live, whether it's around religion or sexuality or an interracial relationship or gender identity, whatever the case, God's either an element of you or not.
That's true.
And if God made you the way you are, then isn't that good?
Right.
God, that's right. If we really take seriously the opening passages of the creation story in the Bible, God created, and it was good. Yeah. God created animals, and it was good. God created light, and it was good. So doesn't that include us? And if that's the case, then if somebody shifts their path in life, then maybe, hopefully, they are becoming more truly their authentic self. That's my belief. And, a related idea is that there are many paths to God, right? Different paths, same destination.
That's true.
So if that's the case, if you shift from being Baptist to being evangelical, or Baptist to being Catholic, or Baptist to being a Muslim, then as long as you're still believing in God, then that's good. I'm not quite sure, how the atheist or the agnostic plays into that, but that is also a very common idea.
Yeah, I agree. I was listening to I'm kind of switch back over, but I was listening to one of your podcast episodes, and I heard you mention through the interview with this young lady that you kind of felt like Christianity is an ocean. Can you expound on that for me?
I'm trying to think of which interview that was.
Let me see. I can find it. It was with Sue Howard.
Oh, yeah. A British evangelical. That was actually something I realized quite a long time ago. As I was learning more about Judaism, holidays, beliefs, scripture, all of that, I was very aware of the Christian world as well. And the more I got into the research, the bigger that world got. And it still feels gigantic. I think I'm not good at remembering statistics. So this may need to be corrected. But I think I read that like 50% of the world's religious people are Christians. It's some gigantic number.
Wow.
And half of when I was I got a Master of Jewish Liberal Studies, and I took I'm in the Boston area, and I took some courses at Boston College, which is Catholic. It's a Jesuit school. And one of the things that I learned there was that Catholics are half of all Christians, which is also a gigantic number.
What do you mean by that?
That among Christians in the world, 50% are Catholic and 50% are Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Evangelicals, et cetera, et cetera. That is a gigantic chunk of people.
It is.
Right. And that really impacted my sense of the balance of people in the world. The last thing I'll note is that as a Jew, I am a tiny, tiny minority. We are less than 1% of the world population. 1%. That's a very small number. And it influences, you asked earlier about the influence of background on your religious decision. Your minority or majority status in the world, in the country, in your community also influences how you see yourself and how you interact with the larger world. So that's a related idea.
Yeah. That's interesting. That kind of makes me think that, or makes me wonder if more people that, if there's that amount of Christians, are some of us just saying it just to say it? Do we actually believe it? Or is that what we've been kind of taught? Like, we're Christian, you have to get baptized, and you just kind of went about it that way. It just kind of makes me wonder. That's just my thoughts, because I'm always thinking.
Yeah, Tamara, I think that is a really super interesting question, and I would be very interested in exploring that more with you.
Yeah.
I think it's a separate conversation, but I would be interested in doing that because I think it's completely relevant. And I'll drop in a related bit of understanding that's come up for me in the research, is that there's this assumption that Orthodox, so very, very religious, I'd say that in quotes, are more devout, are more serious than liberals. And that's, in fact, not true. They approach their religious practice differently, but it doesn't mean that it's deeper in their heart necessarily. Again, these direct lines are tricky to draw. What I would say is that liberals approach their practice and their beliefs from a different angle. So taking Jews, Orthodox Jews, this is some bit of generalization, but basically Orthodox Jews start from the point of what I call the rules and regs. And in Orthodox Judaism, there are lots of them. Liberal Jews start from, how do we live today? What are the values and practices that support my expression as a Jew in the community? Those are two radically different starting points, and they have an immediate impact on how you're expressing your religion. So are you, for an Orthodox Jew, keeping kosher, so meat and milk separate, don't eat pork, don't eat shellfish, all of that? If you're a liberal, is your starting point social action, social justice work, right? As Rabbi Joshua Heschel said, praying with my feet. That's what he said when he worked with Martin Luther King Jr. I'm praying with my feet. That's social action work. Right now, he was a devout Jew. He was really, his Jewish identity was deep and profound, and he was extremely knowledgeable and wrote fantastic books, which I really recommend reading. But it wasn't about the rules and regs. That wasn't the key piece. It was about how am I expressing my Jewish values in the world.
I love that. That's so interesting. So very interesting. I did want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about your podcast.
Please.
Can you share a little bit about your podcast that you have?
Yeah, happy to. So my podcast is called Living Our Beliefs. It is an offshoot of the Talking with God Project, and I began it in January of 2022. So it's quite new. I have released 18 episodes so far and am booked mostly through 2022 and starting to book in 2023.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. As with the project, I am interviewing observant Jews, Christians, Muslims, so same crowd, but my focus has narrowed to lived religion, where the Talking with God Project research included sense of God, prayer practice, and how you live your faith. The podcast is focused on that last third. How are you living your faith? How is it showing up in the family, at work, in the community? How is it supporting you? Or maybe not. And what do you do? What's your current practice?
Do you have any guests that kind of maybe their ways kind of maybe surprised you?
Love that question. Yeah, I've been surprised. I've interviewed about 4 evangelicals. And I've been surprised that they've been reluctant to use that term. They say, oh, I'm a Christian. And at least one of them has admitted that it's because she's aware that evangelical has a bad rap. So if that's the case, I can understand why you'd be reluctant to use that term, even if that's the church you belong to. Right? The bad rap comes from heavy proselytizing, witnessing, as some people call it.
Mm-hmm.
I've also been surprised that 2 of them have said, I'm not religious, I'm a Christian. I have a relationship with God. And they seem to be drawing a definition of being religious is about the rules and regs, is about the structure and the institution. And being a Christian is modeling Christ, is following the core idea of God as love.
What do you think about it?
I don't know. It's, as a Jew, I find these kinds of distinctions a bit hard to grasp, frankly.
Why?
Because it immediately leads to a whole discussion about your relationship with God, about an ongoing stream of prayer and conversation with God, making requests, so petitioning God for things, and getting answers. I don't have that kind of relationship with God. Sometimes, frankly, Tamara, I wish I did. That would be, I see how great that would be to say, oh, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. God, what do you think? Can you help me? And you somehow, get an answer. I respect it. I totally respect it. I just can't get there.
Is it that you feel like you're maybe hesitant, or do you just honestly feel like that won't happen for me? Have you tried it?
I did. So the first, and this touches, it's hard to completely distinguish between my project research and the podcast. So apologies. I will flip back and forth a bit. One of the very first research interviews I did was with a coaching colleague in Kenya. Wonderful, bright woman, full of joy and, fantastic drive and clarity of mission. She talked about praying in numbers, She said that. She prays in numbers. And she gets incredibly specific. So she'll pray for a Toyota Corolla 4-door green, and it shows up in her life. She said she keeps doing it because he keeps working. I can't argue with success, right? Someone, likewise, a podcast that I'm in the process of editing that will be the next to be released is with an evangelical from Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
So she's Chinese. She now lives in Switzerland. She talked about daily, ongoing discussion, questioning, turning to God for things large and small. And I mean small, like she's standing in the grocery store looking at a wall of cereal options. Right? We know this. Anybody in America mostly knows this feeling of just so many choices. And she will say, I don't know, God, this is too much. What should I choose? And she gets an answer. Okay. I don't deny her experience. I just can't relate. So one more point. I know I give lots of long answers to your wonderful questions.
No, they're great though.
So the last thing I'll add is that in the Jewish world, a common way to think about our relationship to God is called the clockmaker theory. This is, if you look at the Bible, God is very intimately active in our lives. And then, much like a parent and a child, as the child is growing up, God becomes more removed step by step. And at this point, people are in charge. God is still there, but farther in the background. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to digest it all. So it's kind of like, I don't know. So like, what do you do like in times of, excuse my, I guess like ignorance, but like, what do you do when you kind of need him if he's kind of as an adult pushed back, or you need some help mentally, or just like, I'm struggling. What do you do?
Yeah, another good question. This points to one of the, one of the differences between Christianity and Judaism. Christianity begins with faith. Judaism is about action. Believing in God is not a requirement for being a Jew or even being a member of a synagogue. There is no litmus test at the door of the synagogue saying, well, do you believe? If so, you can come in. If not, go away. We don't have that. And when I talk about Judaism being about action, it's practice, it's study, it's good deeds. Those are the three core pillars.
Mm-hmm. And
good deeds can include social action. It can include visiting the sick, going to a funeral, any, people and people you don't know. Doesn't matter. Giving charity, right? Giving money to charity. All of that. Study is hugely important. So reading Torah, which is, you could also say the Hebrew Bible. Christians call it the Old Testament. Going to services, observing Shabbat, so Friday evening to Saturday evening. Hopefully keeping kosher, being involved in your synagogue.
Okay. That's fair. And I understand.
I totally recognize, Tamara, that this is a completely different way to think about religion. I get that.
So do you think, I think you kind of answered this, but I just kind of wanted to circle back to it. When we talked about how people feel like they are a Christian, but I don't want to associate myself with a religion, but I have a relationship with God. So you feel like that's okay, or it's just like something I just cannot relate to that?
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
What I care about at the end of the day, Tamara, is that whatever they're doing is working for them. that they feel supported, that they feel whole, that they feel well, right? Your podcast is about wealth and wellness, which is such a beautiful pairing, that they feel spiritually well and that they feel enriched by whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah, I agree.
I am not proscriptive. It is not my place to tell anyone what their religious practice or belief should be. That's not my place. Completely inappropriate.
I agree wholeheartedly.
What I do encourage is that people reflect, that they are thinking about what they're doing, that they're thinking about what it means for them and how supported they feel. And if they're coming up with negative answers, that they take the risk. I know this can be uncomfortable for some, but as you were saying with your own experience, to say, okay, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and I'm going to go explore this other place, whatever it is. And then you find out, proof is in the pudding. Yeah. You attend, you have an experience, you say, wow, this is fantastic. I'm seeing and experiencing something different, something more joyous, more meditative, more whatever it is you want. And you carry on. One more thing I'll add is that religious belief and practice is not a static thing. I hope it's not a static thing. I think what concerns me most is when people speak like they have a corner on the market, like they have all the answers. It's all sewn up. I worry for those people. It's not my place to sort out their issues, but that concerns me because that tells me they have stopped thinking. They have stopped asking. They have stopped questioning and mulling and trying out new things. Their mind is closed. And as that great expression, I think from the 60s said, your mind is like an umbrella. It only works when it's open.
I agree.
Sounds like we're agreeing on a lot of things, Tamara.
Yes. With the podcast, you say you have interviews lined out for the rest of the year. I wanted to know, how, you already kind of shared, the things that possibly kind of surprise you. Do you want to kind of keep your podcast that way where you're speaking with people of different religions? Would you be open to having a guest that's an atheist?
I plan to keep the focus on observant Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
That's fair.
That is already a gigantic crowd. And because I'm interviewing people covering the spectrum from liberal to orthodox, that really is a lot of people. And it's a lot of variety to try to wrap your brain around. So I think that there could be a separate, super interesting bit of research / podcast on people who have left their religion and become atheists, like this woman you talked about. That's a whole separate line. And I think you'd need to approach it from kind of a different point of view.
I agree. I understand. I'm so intrigued by your research that you did with these different people. Do you have any ideas of possibly expanding it to maybe different colleges, or taking this research information you've been given and putting it in another platform?
Music to my ears. Yes, something I'm exploring with my advisory council is creating teaching lessons that could be used in colleges. I'm not so sure high school because that's quite a different age and different concerns, but I think colleges would be, or would be absolutely an attractive audience, and I'm very interested in exploring that. And I have a ton of material. And since I've been a trainer, when I was in Berlin, I was a language trainer. So I have lots of training experience. I know how to create a lesson plan, and I could easily use the material. Yeah, definitely want to do that. And I imagine a book is out there somewhere in my future.
Yep. I agree. I thought that would be that the question came from me thinking that this would be great for like colleges being able to use this information there. So what is next for Méli?
Well, certainly continuing what I'm doing. So continuing the podcast, continuing the blog post, which currently are reflections on different podcast episodes. They're all on the website. Continuing to give talks at churches, synagogues, mosques, schools, nonprofit organizations, corporations, wherever, leading workshops that are based on the research, articles and publications. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm. It is. I'm excited to see where it takes you. I'm going to list the links in our bio for your podcast as well as your website. Is there any other place you would like to share with our audience where they can find more information about you?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, the website, www.talkingwithgodproject.org is the place to go. There is a page where you can hear podcasts. There's a page of blog posts. There's a place where you can hear videos of talks I've given and give you an idea of how inviting me to your organization would work, workshops, all kinds of information there. Okay.
Thank you so much. This was an interesting conversation. I actually didn't want to stop it. I wanted to keep going because I just like to dissect things and think like out of my normal environment. I like talking about religion. So as I stated, it was so exciting for me. I'm so excited we got the opportunity to connect. So I hope this isn't the last time that we work together or I hear from you. So thank you once again for joining us on the Wealth and Wellness podcast.
Well, thank you, Tamara. And I feel likewise. I'm just thrilled to be in contact with you and to get to know you. And I certainly want to continue the connection. Thank you so much.
And there you have it. I truly hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Be sure to subscribe to the Wealth and Wellness podcast and leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought. Send us a message on social media and let me know what you thought about today's episode. To learn more about the Talking with God Project and Living Our Beliefs podcast, please be sure to check the links in our show notes. Until next time.